The rain slid down the windshield of my car in wavering, silvery lines, distorting the glow of the city lights into something almost painterly, streaks of gold and red blurring together against the dark. San Francisco had that way of looking beautiful even when the sky opened up, but tonight I couldn't appreciate it. My mind was far from the view. The windshield wipers kept a steady rhythm, almost matching the tight, pounding cadence of my pulse. I sat there in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel a little too hard, listening to the muted drum of rain on the roof. My black dress clung uncomfortably to me, the chill in the air seeping into my skin. The heaviness in the car wasn't just the weather, it was the silence, thick and charged, carrying both unspoken grief and something hotter, sharper, and much more dangerous than sadness. In the passenger seat, my husband Ethan sat with his head slightly turned toward me. He'd been quiet for the past several minutes, the kind of quiet that comes from not knowing if words will help or make things worse. Finally, his voice came, soft and careful, like he was approaching a skittish animal. "Claire, are you okay?" After what he said back there. I turned my head slowly, meeting his gaze. His eyes were full of concern, but mine felt carved from ice. Cold. Focused. There was no point softening them. Ethan had always been the peacekeeper, the one to mediate arguments, to steer conversations away from cliffs. He meant well. But tonight wasn't about smoothing anything over. "You really didn't notice, did you?" I asked quietly, my voice flat. His eyebrows pulled together. "Notice what?" Instead of answering, I reached down into my black leather handbag. My fingers closed around a heavy, matte grey device, my encrypted work phone. It was the kind of phone that didn't light up with cheerful notifications or ping with social media updates. It was for one thing and one thing only, business that required absolute security. Ethan had never seen me use it for a personal call, because I never had. I pressed the single number on my speed dial. The line didn't even ring once. "Grant," it came, the voice on the other end, immediate, clipped, all business. "This is Agent Carter," I said, my tone shifting instantly into the cold, measured cadence I reserved for one part of my life, the part Ethan knew nothing about. "Authorization code, Victor Alpha 9. There was a pause, just long enough for him to verify. I kept my eyes on the stately silhouette of the Carter family estate, glowing in the rain, the same place where my grandfather's funeral reception was still underway. The same place where my brother was celebrating, not mourning. "I have direct confirmation," I continued. "Primary target is on location and has just admitted to the Honolulu transfer. He is actively conducting business." Grant didn't say anything, waiting for the go-ahead. "Execute the warrant," I said, my voice sharp and unyielding. "Seal the entire property. No one in or out." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan's expression change, confusion, dawning recognition, and then something like silent shock. He knew me as a woman who worked long hours at an unremarkable government office, who came home with tired eyes and offered vague answers about her day. He didn't know that I had the authority to give an order that would set a federal operation into motion. But I didn't have time to explain, not yet. I let my gaze rest on the dark outline of the house where my family still gathered, the windows glowing warmly against the storm. Inside, there were soft murmurs of condolence, the clinking of glasses, and the hollow rituals of mourning. But beneath it, there was something uglier, greed. My brother's arrogance had been simmering all night, and a few minutes earlier, it had finally boiled over into words that sealed his fate. Words he thought were harmless bragging. Words that, to me, were the final missing link in an 18-month-long investigation. It's strange how quickly moments can shift. Just half an hour ago, I'd been a silent figure in the corner of that house, trying to avoid notice. Now, sitting here in the rain, I had just ordered the full weight of the federal government to close its fist around him. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my family had called me the useless soldier, the girl who couldn't finish her training, who'd washed out of the military after an injury. They thought I'd traded combat boots for a desk job in some anonymous building, doing paperwork no one cared about. They had no idea that my desk was in a secure underground facility, and that my paperwork could dismantle criminal empires. Ethan was still staring at me, his lips parting like he wanted to ask a dozen questions at once. But I kept my eyes on the estate, watching the rain blur its edges, as if the house itself were already fading into a memory. Because that's what it would be, soon, a relic of the Carter legacy, swallowed whole by the consequences my brother had brought on himself. This wasn't about revenge. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. 15 minutes earlier, I had been standing in the farthest corner of my grandfather's massive reception hall, trying to blend into the background like a shadow. The air inside was thick with the scent of lilies and polished oak, the murmur of voices muted under the weight of grief. But grief wasn't the only thing floating in that room. Ambition, pride, and whispered speculation hung in the air like invisible smoke. I had my back to the large bay window when I saw him approaching. Justin Carter. My older brother. The family's golden child, their heir apparent, their self-proclaimed a born leader. Even at a funeral, he looked like he was walking a red carpet. The tailored charcoal suit. The diamond cufflinks flashing subtly under the chandelier's light. The confidence that seemed to command the space around him. And that smirk, God, that smirk. I'd seen it my whole life. It was the look he wore when he was about to twist the knife. Well, well, he said, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear, though the smugness carried easily over the hum of the crowd. The useless soldier decided to show up. I kept my face unreadable. He thrived on reactions, and I had no intention of feeding his appetite. He gestured loosely at the room, as if he were its master, which, in a way, he was. Every conversation seemed to orbit him. Take a good look, Claire, he said, leaning in slightly. This is what a real legacy looks like. Grandpa left me the company. All of it. I didn't move. My eyes stayed on his, cool and steady. He wanted to see the sting, the disappointment. He wasn't going to get it. You? He continued with a casual shrug. Well, I'm sure your share is enough to cover rent for a year. Don't blow it all in one place. His lips curved into a mockingly sympathetic smile. I mean, you've always been practical, right? You can probably stretch it. There it was, the latest entry in the long, private ledger I'd kept since my 20s. Every slight, every little jab tucked away like receipts I would never throw out. I had a whole mental filing cabinet dedicated to him. But then, as if he'd already grown bored of his own performance, he glanced at his phone and delivered the line that changed everything. Anyway, I've got to close this deal. The Honolulu Consortium doesn't wait for funerals. The words might as well have been a gunshot in a silent room. Not for anyone else, of course. To them, it was just another arrogant business comment. But for me, it was the last piece. the final puzzle edge snapping into place after 18 months of chasing shadows. I felt my heart beat slow, my breathing settle into something steady and deliberate. It was as though someone had flipped a switch in my head. One moment, I was his little sister, standing quietly at the back of the room. The next, I was Agent Claire Carter, lead investigator on an international money laundering case that had now just been handed its smoking gun. I didn't speak. Not to him, not to anyone. I simply turned away, scanning the crowd for Ethan. When I spotted him near the front, speaking politely to one of my great-aunts, I crossed the room without hesitation. My fingers found his arm in a firm grip, firm enough that he looked at me in surprise. "We have to leave," EI said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "What?" "Now?" he asked, startled. "Claire, what's?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My body was already in motion, steering him toward the heavy double doors that opened onto the estate's sprawling lawn. As we passed through clusters of relatives, I caught snippets of polite chatter, condolences, business gossip, someone asking about wine, but all of it faded under the thrum of the decision I'd already made. To them, I was leaving early because I couldn't handle the crowd, or because the memories were too much. Let them think that. The truth was far more precise, far colder. My brother thought he'd just twisted the knife one more time. He had no idea he'd just handed me the keys to his own cell. By the time we stepped out into the rain, my mind was already in operational mode. I wasn't walking across my family's manicured lawn. I was walking across the final bridge between years of silent evidence gathering and the strike I'd been preparing for. Ethan must have felt the tension radiating from me, because he didn't try to make small talk. We reached the car in silence, the sound of the rain on the roof filling the space between us. My pulse was steady now, my focus razor-sharp. From the moment I got into the driver's seat and closed the door, there was only one thing left to do. The call. The one that would turn this quiet, rain-soaked night into the loudest reckoning my family had ever witnessed. The nickname had been born over a decade earlier, at a long, polished mahogany dining table in our parents' home in Palo Alto. The smell of lemon polish hung in the air, mixing with the aroma of roast beef and garlic potatoes, a scent that should have felt comforting. Instead, every bite tasted like tension. I was 21. My right arm was bound tight in a black sling, the sharp, grinding ache in my shoulder a constant reminder of what had ended before it ever truly began. A training accident, they'd called it. Just a simple bad fall during an obstacle course drill. But the damage had been serious, the kind of injury that didn't heal back to full strength. My dream of serving a full military career, gone, just like that. Months of rehab had brought back most of my range of motion, but the army had already stamped my file with the final word, discharged. That night, my father sat at the head of the table, as he always did. He'd been a Navy man himself, and he saw the world through a lens of winners and losers, missions completed or failed. In his eyes, there was no middle ground. He raised his glass, not to me, but to my older brother. To the son who knows how to finish what he starts, he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the table. His eyes flicked away from the sling on my arm like it was an embarrassment he didn't want to acknowledge. Justin smiled modestly, as though the praise were just a formality, but I caught the glint in his eyes. He'd just been accepted into the Wharton School of Business, and he knew my father was already picturing him as the future of the family company. "Don't worry, sis," Justin said to me, lifting his wine glass in mock sympathy. "Not everyone's cut out for the hard stuff." Maybe you'll find a nice, safe desk somewhere. It was delivered with the cadence of encouragement, but the words were a dagger wrapped in velvet. He said it like it was an inside joke between us, but I knew it was a performance for the table, a way to position himself as the achiever, and me as the cautionary tale. The rest of the family chuckled politely, and the conversation shifted back to his MBA plans, his internship offers, his bright future. I stayed silent, pushing a small piece of roast beef around my plate. The physical pain in my shoulder was nothing compared to the heavier ache building in my chest, the realization that they had already rewritten my story for me. In their version, I was the one who'd quit. The one who'd failed. The one who wasn't strong enough. That label, useless soldier, didn't come out of Justin's mouth that night, but it was born in the smirks, in the pointed avoidance of my father's eyes. In the way my mother quietly refilled my water instead of speaking up for me. They carried that version of me forward for the next decade, weaving it into the subtext of every family gathering. They never asked what I was doing with my life, because they had already decided it wasn't worth knowing. Years later, at a summer barbecue, I made the mistake of trying to share something real. By then, I had built a career as an intelligence analyst at the Department of Justice. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. I'd been working on a project tracking international compliance in high-risk financial transfers, complex, tedious work that could dismantle entire criminal networks if done right. I tried to explain it, mentioning patterns in offshore banking that pointed to large-scale fraud. But before I could get 2 sentences out, Justin interrupted with a loud, theatrical laugh. "So you're basically a glorified bookkeeper for the government," he said, turning to our parents. Meanwhile, I just landed a 7-figure import deal. We're talking exclusive rights to a Swiss luxury watch line. In an instant, the entire table's attention pivoted to him. Questions flew about profit margins, logistics, his brilliant strategy. My mother asked if she could see a sample watch. My father beamed like Justin had just personally raised the GDP. I stood there by the grill, holding a paper plate, my story cut short and discarded like an unimportant footnote. I might as well have been invisible. That was the way of things. Justin dealt in numbers that impressed people, millions of dollars, high-end brands. I dealt in data that couldn't be photographed for a glossy brochure. They understood his world. Mine might as well have been in another language. What they didn't know, what they never cared to know, was that while Justin was sprinting toward a cliff, I was running a marathon in a world they couldn't even imagine. The consequences of my work didn't show up in bank accounts or press releases. They showed up in sealed court files, in prevented attacks, in the quiet dismantling of criminal webs. And it was in that quiet, invisible world that I had started seeing a familiar name pop up in the data streams. Justin Carter. My brother. The golden child. The winner. Not as a victim. As a player. In my family's eyes, I was a quiet bureaucrat, a woman who wore sensible shoes and came home late from some faceless government office where nothing important ever happened. They thought my job title, analyst, meant I spent my days staring at spreadsheets, filing reports no one read. To them, I was still that girl at the end of the table, this useless soldier who'd been lucky to find a desk job at all. They couldn't have been more wrong. My real office had no windows, no sunlight, and no decorative plants to soften the edges. It was buried 3 floors underground in a secure federal building in Washington, D.C., accessible only through biometric scanners, armed checkpoints, and a vault-like door that closed with a sound you could feel in your chest. It was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, the kind of place where classified material lives and dies without ever touching the outside world. The hum of the servers was constant, a low mechanical heartbeat in the background. On one wall, a bank of massive high-resolution monitors glowed with shifting data streams, financial transactions, satellite imagery, encrypted communications scrolling faster than most people could read. On the far end of the room, a large digital map displayed a web of lines stretching across continents, each one representing a transaction or connection we were tracking. I wasn't a junior paper pusher here. I was the lead analyst on an active case that had its tendrils on 3 continents and implications far beyond our borders. The code name was Operation Tidefall. And at its center was an international money laundering network that had been quietly moving hundreds of millions through shell corporations, offshore accounts, and illegitimate business fronts. We'd traced the flow of funds from small, almost invisible transactions in the Caribbean, through layered accounts in Singapore and Zurich, all the way to a final node in Honolulu, the Honolulu Consortium. That was the last stop before the money slipped into the US economy, laundered clean. And it was my job to find the US-based entry point. For months, the digital evidence had been like a trail of smoke, leading somewhere, but always just out of reach. Then, slowly, a pattern emerged. Company names, directors, and transactions began aligning in a way that was too consistent to be coincidence. The beneficial ownership was hidden behind layers of legal camouflage, but I knew with absolute certainty that the American arm of this network ran through the Carter family business. My family's business. The irony was acidic. While my relatives dismissed me as the weak link in the Carter name, I was building a federal case that could take down the family's crown jewel. The only people who knew what I was working on were in that room with me, including Special Agent in Charge Daniel Grant. He was a man with steel-gray hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for trusting his best analysts more than some field agents trusted their sidearms. If you had Grant's confidence, you'd earned it. That day, I'd been presenting to a room full of seasoned agents. I pointed to one of the main transaction charts on the big screen. The Shell Corporation registered in Cyprus is a classic layering tactic, I explained, tracing the connection with a laser pointer. Funds pass through 3 separate offshore accounts before hitting the Honolulu Consortium. That's the laundering endpoint for Tidefall. The beneficial owner is still masked, but the US link is inside Carter Industries. The room was silent, the kind of silence that meant the information mattered. No one rolled their eyes. No one dismissed me as a glorified bookkeeper. Here, my words could move mountains. Here, a single confirmed link could put a tactical team on a plane within hours. Ethan existed in the space between my 2 lives. He knew I worked long hours and that my work was classified. He saw the stress, the late nights, the moments when I came home looking like I'd aged a year in a day. But he didn't know the details. He couldn't. The less he knew, the safer he was. One evening, after a particularly nasty comment from Justin about my hobby job, Ethan had tried to defend me. Her job is complicated, Justin. She works harder than you think. Justin had just smirked at him like he was indulging a child. So does my gardener, Ethan. Later that night, I saw the frustration in Ethan's eyes. He wanted to stand up for me. But I'd given him nothing to stand on, a wooden sword in a steel fight. How could he defend a reality he wasn't allowed to know existed? That was the cost of my job. My family could go on believing their little story about me because it kept them in the dark, and it kept them alive. Every insult, every dismissive chuckle at my expense, it was the price I paid for their safety. and I had been willing to pay it, until the day Justin crossed the line and handed me the missing piece himself. The day before my grandfather's funeral, I sat alone in my office, the glow of the monitors casting a cold light across the room. Outside, Washington was in the grip of late winter, grey skies, icy sidewalks, the kind of wind that cuts straight through you. Inside the SCIF, the temperature was always the same, a steady, almost sterile chill that kept the servers happy and the agents awake. On the largest screen in front of me was a satellite image of the Carter estate in San Francisco. The photo had been taken the week before, the main house sitting like a crown jewel in the center, the surrounding gardens manicured to perfection, the guest houses neatly lined along the private drive. A bright red circle highlighted the main building, my target area. I picked up the secure landline on my desk and punched in the memorized code for my direct line to Daniel Grant. It rang once. "Grant," he said, his voice as even as ever. "Sir," I began, my tone clipped and professional. "The funeral is tomorrow. I'll be in the same room with him." He didn't have to ask who I meant. For months, him had been shorthand for my brother. "If he says anything," I continued, "if he confirms the Honolulu link, we'll have verbal confirmation on top of the digital trail." There was no hesitation on Grant's end. "The tactical team is already on standby within a 5-mile radius. The arrest and seizure warrants are signed and sealed. You're the final go or no-go, Carter. You give the word, and we execute Operation Deep Current." Deep Current. The name alone carried weight, the code name chosen for an operation meant to sweep in silently and pull everything under. I stared at the satellite image again, my eyes tracing the path from the front gates to the main house. Tomorrow, the lawn would be full of people in black, clutching umbrellas and speaking in hushed tones. They'd think they were gathering to mourn a patriarch. In reality, they'd be standing inside the final phase of a federal sting I had personally designed. There was a pang in my chest, a whisper of betrayal. Using a family gathering as bait felt like crossing some invisible line. But then I remembered the case file sitting on my desk, thick enough to crush a man's hand. 18 months of data. Every page another nail in the coffin of Carter Industries' clean image. Offshore accounts. False invoices. Shell companies with directors who didn't exist. And at the center of it all, Justin. This wasn't about old grudges or sibling rivalry. I'd locked those feelings away in a mental vault the day I took my oath. This was about the lore. About the fact that my brother had turned our grandfather's company into a washing machine for criminal cash. The next morning, I dressed for 2 occasions. Black dress, modest jewelry, hair neatly pulled back, appropriate for a funeral. But underneath, every choice was tactical. Low heels I could move quickly in, a jacket with an inner pocket for my work phone, minimal makeup that wouldn't smear if the weather turned. The estate was just as I remembered it, sprawling, opulent, and suffocating in its perfection. Even through the drizzle, you could see the way the Carter name was etched into every stone and beam, as though the house itself was bragging. Inside, the reception hall smelled faintly of lilies and expensive wood polish. The soft murmur of condolences filled the air, punctuated now and then by the faint clink of glasses. I kept to the edges of the room, scanning without appearing to scan. Justin was easy to find. He was the gravitational center, pulling people toward him with charm that, to the untrained eye, looked effortless. But I could see the telltale signs, the calculated pauses, the deliberate shifts in body language, the way he was already working the room for business even with our grandfather's portrait staring down from the mantel. He didn't spot me at first. When he finally did, He made his way over with that same smirk he'd worn 1,000 times. The one that said he was about to make my presence feel like a mistake. His words, "The Honolulu Consortium doesn't wait for funerals," landed like a thunderclap in my head. Outwardly, I didn't flinch. Inwardly, every wire in my mind connected at once. This was it. The last missing piece. I excused myself without a word, cutting through the crowd until I reached Ethan. His face shifted from confusion to concern as I took his arm. "We need to leave," I told him. "What? Why?" "Claire, what's going on?" I didn't answer. The less he knew now, the better. We crossed the slick stone steps to the car, the rain coming down harder now, spattering against the windshield as we climbed in. My pulse was steady. My decision was final. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I pulled it from my jacket pocket. I pressed the button. The line connected instantly. "Grant." "This is Agent Carter," I said, my eyes locked on the estate. "Execute the warrant." Full lockdown. The next 10 minutes stretched like an eternity. Ethan sat beside me, his eyes darting between my face and the blurred outline of the Carter estate through the rain-smeared windshield. I could feel the questions radiating off him, but he didn't voice them. He must have sensed that whatever was about to happen. It was already in motion and unstoppable. There were no sirens, no flashing lights at first, just the faint, deliberate crunch of tires on the long gravel driveway. One black SUV appeared, then another, then a third, their tinted windows reflecting the faint glow from the estate's lanterns. Each one bore the subtle but unmistakable government plates. More vehicles followed, moving in silent formation like a convoy of shadows. They reached the gates, which swung open without protest. Someone inside had already been quietly instructed to cooperate. The SUVs fanned out with precision, blocking every possible exit, the main gate, the side service road, even the narrow rear drive that led to the garden staff's cottages. The doors opened in unison, and agents in dark jackets stepped out, the yellow FBI lettering stark against the stormy grey afternoon. They didn't shout or hesitate. They moved like a tide, flowing toward the house in perfect, silent coordination. From our vantage point near the road, I could see guests turning toward the commotion. Some stepped back in alarm. Others froze mid-conversation, champagne flutes suspended halfway to their lips. The agents swept into the grand reception hall with calm authority, their presence instantly reordering the atmosphere from genteel mourning to something far more electric. Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Everyone stay where you are," the lead agent's voice rang out, firm and clear. From the doorway, Justin emerged, his brows knitted together in irritation rather than fear. He took one look at the agents and laughed, an arrogant, disbelieving sound. "Is this a joke?" "Who are you people?" he demanded, stepping forward as though he could dismiss them with sheer force of personality. The lead agent didn't look at anyone else. He unfolded a document, glanced at the attached photo, and locked eyes on my brother. "Justin Carter," he said evenly. "You are under arrest for violating the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and conspiracy to launder monetary instruments." The formal charge rolled through the air like a hammer blow. A couple of relatives gasped. One of our uncles muttered a confused curse under his breath. Justin's smirk faltered for the first time, but only for a heartbeat. "You've got to be kidding me," he scoffed, looking around the room for support. "This is ridiculous." Two agents stepped forward with swift, practiced movements. In one smooth motion, they turned him around and locked his wrists in steel cuffs. The metallic click was louder to me than the rain, louder than the murmurs beginning to swell around the room. That's when Justin's eyes found me. He scanned the lawn until he saw me standing next to our car. His expression shifted from confusion to dawning realization, and then to a roar, boiling rage. You! His voice cracked, rising over the patter of rain and the low hum of shocked voices. You did this? You worthless! Whatever insult he had lined up was cut short by the arrival of Daniel Grant himself. He emerged from one of the SUVs, his dark overcoat slick with rain, his presence radiating calm authority. Without breaking stride, he walked past the stunned guests, past Justin, still cuffed and sputtering, and stopped directly in front of me. He didn't acknowledge Ethan, didn't glance at my family. His eyes were on mine, steady and certain. His secure, Special Agent Carter, a Grant said, his voice carrying easily over the damp silence. Your intel was perfect. Good work. The words landed like a thunderclap, reverberating across the manicured lawn. I didn't have to look to know what was happening behind me. My relatives were staring, trying to reconcile the woman they'd labeled a failure with the federal agent who had just taken down their favorite son. Justin's face changed again, the rage draining away, replaced by something hollow and stunned. His world, built on inherited privilege and the belief that rules bent for him, had just collapsed in a matter of minutes. And I had been the one to pull the final thread. The agents escorted him toward one of the SUVs. He didn't look back this time. The Carter estate, for the first time in my memory, was utterly silent except for the rain. The black SUVs rolled away one by one, their tires hissing against the rain-slicked gravel. Each carried agents, evidence boxes, or, in Justin's case, the shattered remnants of his arrogance. As the last one disappeared beyond the front gates, the air around the Carter estate shifted. It wasn't grief anymore. It was a stunned, heavy quiet, like the silence that follows an explosion. The guests were scattered across the lawn in small, uneasy clusters. Most of them avoided my eyes, pretending to study the gardens or the ground beneath their feet. Others whispered behind their hands, their glances darting toward the front doors as if they were afraid of what might come next. What came next was swift, efficient, and final. 2 agents emerged from the house carrying a large laminated notice, its bold black lettering impossible to miss even in the rain. Asset forfeiture, federal seizure. They crossed the marble steps without ceremony and affixed it directly to the carved double doors my grandfather had once polished himself every spring. The sound of the tape tearing from its roll felt louder than the rain. For decades, the estate had been the family's pride, the symbol of our name's permanence. Now it was marked like a crime scene. Inside, agents moved through the hallways with quiet purpose. They catalogued documents, photographed ledgers, and packed up anything that might be evidence. A grand oil portrait of my grandfather watched over it all, his painted eyes unblinking. I wondered what he would think, or if, deep down, he had already suspected what Justin had become. My mother stood near the fountain at the center of the circular drive, her coat pulled tight around her. She looked smaller than I remembered. When her gaze met mine, her hand lifted slightly, as if she might wave or beckon me closer. But she stopped halfway, her arm falling back to her side. I didn't move toward her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. To one side of the lawn, an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years was whispering furiously to another relative. I caught fragments, ere humiliation, ear never saw it coming. Their eyes flicked to me, then away, the way people look at a wildfire from a distance. Daniel Grant stood beside me, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched his team work. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In his presence, the entire scene felt like an extension of the briefing room, precise, controlled, inevitable. "They'll try to convince themselves this was all a mistake," he said finally, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Don't let them." "I won't," I replied. An hour later, the agents began to filter out, their tasks complete. One by one, they walked past me with a brief nod or a wordless glance of acknowledgement, the kind reserved for someone who had earned their respect. My family might never understand what had happened here, but these people did. They were my real team. The relatives were questioned on the spot. No one else was implicated. Justin had been careful to keep his schemes to himself, using the family name as a shield without letting them see the details. But ignorance didn't erase the sting of humiliation. For them, the social forelight would be punishment enough. Eventually, the guests began to leave. They drove away slowly, as though each was trying to delay the moment when they'd have to face the outside world and explain why the Carter estate now carried a federal seizure notice. I watched them go, one car at a time, until the driveway was empty except for mine. The rain had slowed to a mist, the kind that clings to your skin and hair like a second layer. The house loomed behind me, dark and silent. It wasn't ours anymore, not really. It belonged to the United States government now. Ethan came to stand beside me. He didn't say anything, but I felt his presence like a steady anchor against the weight of the moment. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one standing in the shadows while the rest of the family basked in the light. This time, I was the light, and it had burned the Carter name down to its foundation. I didn't look back as we walked toward the car. 6 months after the funeral, the world around me smelled faintly of dry erase markers and strong coffee. Gone were the windowless rooms of my analyst days. Now, I stood at the head of a large, glass-walled conference room at FBI headquarters in Philadelphia, sunlight streaming in through tall windows behind me. The plaque outside the door read, "Task Force Deep Current, Special Agent in Charge Claire Carter." It still caught my eye every morning, not because I doubted I'd earned it, but because of the journey it represented. 18 months of investigation. The sting at the funeral. The collapse of Carter Industries. And now this, my own command. The room was full. 20 agents sat at the polished conference table, with more lining the walls. Every eye in the room was on me. On the massive screen behind me glowed a spiderweb of connections, bank transfers, shipping manifests, encrypted messages, all part of a new, even larger operation which spun directly from the ashes of my brother's network. This, EI began, pointing to the central hub in the diagram, is our primary target. Code name, Orion Gate. This network has laundered an estimated $1.3 billion through U.S. shell companies over the last 4 years. We've already tied 2 of their mid-level operators to known terrorist financing cells overseas. That makes this both a criminal and a national security priority. No one in the room looked away. No one interrupted. They were listening, not to the useless soldier in my family once mocked, but to the commanding officer who now directed a multi-agency task force. As I laid out the operational timeline, I caught a glimpse of Daniel Grant standing at the back of the room, his arms folded. He wasn't leading this briefing. I was. But he was here, and the faint, approving smile on his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't charity or mentorship anymore. He had passed the reins to me because I had earned them. When the meeting ended, agents filtered out in pairs, murmuring about assignments and deadlines. Grant lingered just long enough to say, "Good work. You're ready for this." Always were. That night, there was no champagne toast, no formal celebration. I didn't want one. Instead, I met Ethan and a few of my closest team members at a small Italian restaurant tucked into a quiet corner of the city. Red checkered tablecloths, candlelight, the smell of fresh basil and garlic in the air, the kind of place where no one cared about titles or headlines. Ethan reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was warm, steady. But the way he looked at me had changed since that day in the car at the funeral. The love was still there, but now it was layered with something deeper, respect, and maybe a little awe. He knew the truth now, and that truth had forged something unshakable between us. We talked and laughed over plates of pasta and stories from the field. It felt almost normal, almost like life before the investigation, except it wasn't. My world had shifted. The family I'd been born into had been stripped away, but in its place, I'd built another, one bound not by blood, but by trust and shared purpose. As we left the restaurant, I found myself thinking about my grandfather. He had built Carter Industries on hard work and integrity, before Justin had twisted it into something rotten. The company was gone, but the idea of building something worth leaving behind wasn't. I was still building mine, and this time, I'd make sure no one could corrupt it. It was late on a Thursday night when my personal phone, the one that almost never rang, buzzed on my desk. The number was blocked, which in my world usually meant a dead-end robocle or something worse. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in my gut told me to answer. "Claire?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, unfamiliar only because I hadn't heard it in so long without some edge of judgment. My mother. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I could hear her breathing, uneven, like she'd rehearsed this and was already afraid she'd lose her nerve. "We're so sorry," she said finally, her voice catching. "We didn't know what he was doing. We didn't know what you were doing either." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle. It was an apology I'd once fantasized about hearing, a vindication I'd imagined in a dozen different scenarios. But now, it felt distant. Like it belonged to someone else's life. She kept talking, explaining, filling the silence. She said they'd been blind. That they'd believed Justin's version of me because it was easier. That they had no idea their son's empire was built on fraud, or that their daughter's desk job involved dismantling criminal organizations. Her voice cracked when she admitted they'd judged me without ever asking who I had become. I listened without interrupting. I didn't feel the rush of triumph I'd expected, nor the anger I thought might still be buried somewhere inside. Instead, there was just a quiet acceptance, like watching the tide pull away from the shore. "I know, Mom," I said when she finally stopped. My voice was calm, steady. "I have to go." I ended the call before she could respond and set the phone face down on my desk. I didn't save the number. Whatever bridge she was hoping to rebuild, I wasn't sure I wanted to cross it. My peace wasn't something I needed from them anymore. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a fact. The room around me hummed softly with the sound of electronics, the glow from the massive investigation board casting faint shadows across the walls. The board was a map of connections, names, accounts, locations, the living anatomy of the Orion Gate network. Every thread represented another piece of work ahead, another move in the game. I stood, crossing to the board. My fingers brushed lightly over one of the red-marked nodes, already tagged for a field operation. The work was never done. And that was fine. This was the world I had chosen, the one I had built with my own hands, away from the weight of the Carter name. My family had always believed that a legacy was something etched into marble, a name on a building, a plaque in a boardroom. But I'd learned otherwise. A true legacy isn't loud or gilded. It's the quiet, relentless work of defending what's right, even when no one is watching. It's the cases you close that no one will ever read about, the people who sleep safely because of things they'll never know you stopped. Outside the window, the city lights of Philadelphia glimmered in the distance, their reflections rippling across the river. I thought of Ethan, waiting for me at home, and of the team downstairs in the operation center, still working through the night. This was my real family now, the people who stood shoulder to shoulder with me not because of blood, but because of trust. I took a deep breath, picked up my secure phone, and began dialing the next number on my list. Another meeting to set, another lead to chase. There was always another operation. Always another fight. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was proving anything to anyone. I was simply doing my job. The Carter name might have been reduced to a footnote in a federal case file, but I'd built something stronger in its place. Something that didn't need to be inherited to survive. I smiled faintly to myself as the line connected. Special Agent Carter, EI said. Let's get to work.